She steps inside, palms white, and kneels just outside the observer line. Every eye beyond the glass stays fixed ahead. She doesn't say a word. She thrusts a sealed envelope into the vacant witness chair, its edge catching the vinyl seam and making a rasp that echoes in the hush. Her other hand pauses over the recorder, fingers trembling but refusing to mute it. The fluorescent glare catches the envelope like a spotlight on something meant to stay hidden, and something about the scene feels stubbornly wrong. The gallery stays steady. The defense table is a polished stretch of wood under the same fluorescence, the same cup of cooling coffee forgotten beside the stack of briefs that only gets dusted when the maid comes through at noon. The bailiff at the door checks his watch, then tucks the key ring back into a belt pouch as if he's done it every day for a decade, because he has. Behind the glass, the jurors shift in their seats with the rhythm of people who have learned to breathe shallow and slow in these rooms. A nurse's clipboard balanced on her knee, a secretary's ink stamp lifted in a measured thud to mark the minute. From her corner, the niece stays in motion. A sleeve smoothed, a chair nudged a finger's width so it doesn't scrape. Her eyes flick from the envelope to the recorder with the practiced calm of someone who knows any ripple can be caught if she lets it. The recorder's red light blinks in a way that feels as steady as a metronome. And the little rasp of the sealed paper against vinyl already belongs to the catalog of sounds this place knows by heart. Glassware chimed as the niece slid a tray of lemon cookies across the coffee table. The conversation in the living room had been a slow boil, each sentence scraping at the edges. When her uncle rose halfway, his chair scraping the rug so loud the youngest cousin flinched, she pushed herself between him and her aunt's side. "More tea?" she asked, palms stilling on the tray, voice light. Her uncle's jaw flexed, the words started to snake out. But then her aunt lifted her chin and took the offered cup. The niece didn't wait for thanks. She set the tray down with a soft clatter that pulled every eye from the rising storm. "Grandma sent over the recipe for this exact batch," she said, handing a card to her aunt. She was so excited to hear you two were finally getting together again. The uncle sank back, shoulders heavy. The niece made sure her hand lingered on his wrist. The contact was small, but it anchored him. "You'll remember how she used to say the secret was to overbake slightly," she added, matching his gaze. The younger cousin, leaning against the arm of the couch, laughed and jabbed her with a spoonful of cookie crumbs. The uncle let out a breath that wobbled into a laugh. The aunt frowned, then spread butter on her slice, her mouth softening as she watched the kids make a mess. Then her father's voice cut through, low and pointed. "You think you can just waltz in and rewrite things?" He stood, eyes on the niece's uncle, stride too wide for the narrow space. Hands going to the rail of the coffee table, he leaned forward. "We've been trying to hold this family together, not hop onto whatever new story you're inventing." The niece stepped between them almost before her father finished. Fingers curled around his sleeve, pulling him back gently, but firmly enough he could feel the tension. "Dad," she said, and the word snapped like a ribbon. "The game's on in the den, and no one can beat your team when you get in the zone. They started without you again." Her father's breath hitched. The aunt looked toward the hallway, eyebrows raised. The uncle's shoulders dropped, uncertain if he'd heard the same challenge. "The loser buys the next round," she added, squeezing her father's sleeve. He blinked, the taut line between them loosening. "You promised," she reminded him, nodding toward the hallway where the board game box lay half open. The uncle's lips twitched. The father didn't pull away. Instead, he let his hand slide down, and when he moved toward the den, he turned, almost reluctantly, and gave the uncle a nod. The niece exhaled into her own sleeve and sat beside her aunt, picking up a cookie. she whispered. You've still got like 2 more tasks before dessert. Her aunt glanced at her, then glanced at her father with a relieved half-smile. The cousins scrambled toward the game room, hollering about teams, and the uncle sank into the couch, eyes darting between the retreating players and the niece with thin gratitude. The aunt leaned in and touched the niece's forearm as if to steady herself. "Thank you," she said, quiet but real. The niece only shrugged, mouth tight. "Just making sure no one forgets why we're all here," she said, rising to refill the tea kettle. Another minute, another laugh, more crumbs. The niece kept her watch, half a heartbeat ahead of the next flare-up. Request. Scene progress achieved. Emotions managed. Tension deferred with small triumphs. The game pieces clinked as the aunt slid the last token across the board, her smile staying polite but thin. The dad leaned forward, elbows on knees, jaw working. Still close enough to the aunt that a shrug could have been a challenge. The niece stood up with the tray of cookies, setting them on the coffee table before she could be sucked into another standoff. "Was this supposed to calm things down?" he asked without looking at anyone. The question aimed more at the room than a person. She handed him a cookie with both hands, keeping her gaze low. "You all needed a break," she said, voice even. And when the aunt began to reply with an explanation about the recipe, the dad cut her off. "Breaks don't fix the reason we almost blew tonight." The niece could have said what she had heard, what she had stepped between, but the words would have pulled him back across the line. Instead, she placed a bare hand on his forearm and guided it to the armchair. He sank into it, but kept watching the aunt. The niece slid into the cluster of pillows at his feet, pulling her phone from her pocket, thumb already tracing the voice note app. Chronicle, November 18th, 10:47 p.m. Tension still radiating from the hallway. Aunt and father circling. "I keep a low voice," she whispered into the microphone, each word clipped until she could hear her own breath. The app pulsed with red light, like a heartbeat, capturing what no one in the room would claim. The dad's eyes flicked down to her phone. "What are you doing?" he asked, the question sharper now because she wasn't on the same surface as him. She was recording something he wasn't supposed to see. She kept her hand steady, thumb resting on her thigh. "Keeping watch," she replied. And the moment stretched before him. Before he could demand an answer, the aunt leaned toward the dad, offering one of her careful smiles and a new topic about the old radio on the shelf. The dad exhaled through his nose, a tiny surrender, and the air shifted, the edge blunting. The niece let the recorder run a second longer before pocketing the phone, the red light dimming, but the data saved. She wasn't proving anything to anyone. She was preserving what she could. The board game lay half-folded at their feet, its cardboard creases forming a quiet map of the night's old battles. The aunt rose, already gathering pieces to put away. The dad remained seated, palms flat on the armrests, eyes traveling from the aunt to the niece and back. "Don't make me go through this alone again," he said finally, softer, but still a note of demand. The niece, still kneeling, nodded slightly, but her lips didn't form another confession. Her recorder had already heard what she would never utter here. She let the aunt pass with a hug that was deliberate and brief. Then she stood, carrying the tray and the empty glasses toward the kitchen. The hallway remained weighted with things unsaid, but she had given the family another moment of movement and another quiet chronicle for the truth she couldn't risk speaking aloud. The dice lie forgotten in a thin trail across the coffee table. She stands, palms on the wood, and drags the board game toward the edge of the couch, as if pushing the night's pretense with it. "Enough," she says. and the word hits the room like a hand, snapping the silence in two. Her father blinks at her, fingers curling around the plastic cube on the edge of the table. The aunt looks up, eyes widening as if she can't believe the niece is stepping up into the middle of all this. She sets the recorder on the table, thumb sliding the button to play. The whispered chronicle from earlier crackles out, thin but sharp. "Do it tonight," the uncle's voice says, before she says anything. Another voice, her father's, breathes compliance. The room freezes. Even the clock seems to halt. She keeps the recorder going, leaning into the cheap speaker, forcing the words into the space they've been avoiding. "You heard it," she says, voice steady but trembling, while I stood between them. Silence let it fester. Silence kept me from speaking up. He lunges, the chair screeching back, palms rising as if to clap a hand over her mouth. But she doesn't move. "You said we'd stop it," she spits, and the chair scrapes the floor as he pounds his hand beside her on the table. "You said we'd keep her safe. Where was the protection when he crossed the line?" Her aunt moves toward her father, a gentle weight on his arm. But the niece shakes her head, signaling the woman back. "Don't steady him," she warns, eyes locked on her father. "I'm not leaving this room until you admit you knew. Until you say you'll tell her." There is a tremor in her shoulders now, the guilt unspooling into something harder to carry, the recognition that her silence helped them cover it. She holds the recorder toward her father again. "You let him do it." He backs away, breath stuttering, hands sliding down his sides. The board game sits between them, pieces scattered, the tiny plastic house toppled. Her heart hammering, she reaches for her aunt's hand, which she threads through her own fingers, grounding herself. He doesn't speak, but the room shifts. She sees the gears grinding in his jaw, the way his eyes flick toward the door as if he wants to run. His eyes darted to the hallway where the aunt's laughter had drifted earlier. She could still hear the faint scrape of a chair from the kitchen. Aunt probably putting things back, unaware. "This isn't how—" "No," she cut in. "This isn't how you break her heart again. Call her. Tell her now. I'm done keeping my hands off this." She lifted the recorder so the little red light stared at him like a tiny accusation. He backed toward the shelf, her warning tailing behind. "You aren't going to make me do this in front of her." His voice buckled on the last word, the anger thinning into fear. Her throat tightened, but she clamped it down and reached in the direction of the hallway, pressing the Reiki button again. "We already did it in front of her," she said, every syllable a weight bearing down. "You agreed with him. You told him you'd stay quiet. She deserves to hear it from you before this world collapses on her again." A chair scraped sharper now, the aunt's footsteps approaching the doorway. The aunt's head appeared, eyes flicking between the two of them and the recorder in her niece's hand. "What's happening?" she asked, searching their faces. The moment folded in on itself. Father froze, the color draining in waves. He opened his mouth, then closed it, then opened again. "Maybe," he started, but the niece leaned forward. "Tell her. Don't wait for him to come back." She jabbed a finger toward the hallway, then grimaced when she realized how loud it sounded. "Tell her the truth. You promised you would." He didn't move. For a heartbeat, the room throbbed with her own pulse. She could hear the aunt's breath as she stood just beyond the frame. "I can't," he whispered. But the tiny voice held nothing but defeat. The aunt stepped into the room, eyes flicking to the recorder. "I heard you," the niece said, voice quieter. "But you're the one who made the promise." Father's hands curled into fists, nails digging crescents into his palms. He looked at the aunt, then at the niece, then at the recorder. Her heart beat in her throat. but she kept her grip steady. When he finally exhaled and reached for his phone, the tension popped. Months of silence cracking into motion. He dialed her number with trembling fingers. That call was the first small release. He couldn't hang up without speaking, and the aunt saw him lift the line, lips shaping words she couldn't yet hear. She didn't let up. "Say it." Father's voice is thin over the phone, a rope pulled tight with every word he owes to say. "Now, I have to tell you," he says into the receiver, eyes flicking to the niece perched on the edge of the coffee table. She slides the phone to speaker, hands steady, and the living room fills with the thin crackle of the aunt's breath. In the hallway, the aunt pauses, drawn by the tension she can hear. By the time she steps in, the niece has already stacked a small notebook on the table, its cover labeled in her block letters, "Hidden Sacrifices." "Listen," the niece says, pressing play on the whispered chronicle. Her own voice from earlier spills into the room, her demand, the father's agreement with the uncle's plan. The aunt's hand moves as though to reach out through the glass, then drops to the arm of the chair. The niece lifts a bookmarked page and reads aloud, not explaining feelings, but listing. "June, you traded your scholarship interview for extra shifts to cover this house's mortgage. July, you asked me to quit camp so I could keep quiet. Every evening you kept the cookies warm for Dad, while he kept watching the news about the betrayal he was hiding." The aunt's brow tightens. She steps closer, eyes flicking between the recording and the father. "You told me I was imagining things," she says to him, and her voice cuts. "You let him stay in our kitchen for months doing what he did with Uncle." She lifts her chin toward the niece. "And you?" She glances down at the notebook. "You kept tally of every time I gave up sleep to fix what he broke." Father's shoulders drop. He tries to reach for the recorder, fingers trembling. He starts, but the aunt lifts her hand, palm outward. "For the first time all day, I need to hear you say what you told him," she says, looking at the niece. The niece sits straighter, the tape recorder humming now, a witness in the center of the room. "You agreed to the betrayal," she says in a voice that carries. "And I've been keeping those nights quiet while she made her own sacrifices for this family." The father lets the phone slip from his grip. It thuds onto the rug and crackles to silence. He kneels, hands slack at his knees, and the aunt crouches opposite so they meet at eye level. The niece leans forward, not resting until the aunt reaches to take the tape recorder, slides it under her palm, and presses the red light with her thumb. The confession is now hers. Her voice and the evidence fill the room. The aunt looks to the father again. "Tell them," she says. Not a plea, but a command softened only by the ones that follow. "Tell the rest of the family tonight. Let them hear what you admitted to me." He opens his mouth. The niece sees the moment his jaw loosens, the silence he'd built cracking. The aunt's gaze is steady, a spark of calm in the middle of the unraveling. The tape keeps humming, the temperature in the room shifting as the betrayal is no longer protected by silence, and the hidden sacrifices sit in the light between them. The recorder still lay wedged between the cushions when the niece pulled it back into her lap. Her fingers hovered over the red light a second, then released it so the device sat mutely in the center of the coffee table. The father's hands, folded around each other, were shaking again. The aunt, knees tucked under her, looked at the ceiling and then at the niece as if searching for the next move. "Silence isn't protection," the niece said. She slid off the couch and walked straight to the side table, dragging the board game box behind her. She rattled through the cards until she found the stack of index cards they had been using to keep score. The cards now became a list, Call the cousin, schedule the family meeting, write the timeline. She tossed one onto the coffee table and pointed at it. "You'll start with Cousin Maya," she said to her father, "and I'll call Uncle Aaron with the truth about what happened, including what he did to you." He opened his mouth to protest, to say that this was enough, that she had already done more than any of them deserved. "Don't!" the aunt snapped, sharper than before. Her fingers curled around the edge of the cushion. "We owe this to everyone who was kept in the dark." The father glanced at the aunt and then at the niece, as if measuring the distance between them. He swallowed hard. "I don't know how to say it," he muttered. The niece stood closer, putting one shoe on the carpet and the other still on the rug. "Start with exactly what you just heard," she said. "Say you agreed to the betrayal. Say you kept her." She gestured toward the aunt. "From knowing the truth. Say that we all owe her a chance to heal with facts, not lies." He nodded once, slow. "I'll call Maya tonight," he said, voice cracking. "I'll tell her everything." The aunt's shoulders dropped a fraction. The niece went to the shelf, pulled a spiral-bound notebook they had used for recipes, and flipped to a blank page. She held up a pen and pointed at the father. "Write down what you tell her," she said. "This isn't just about saying it aloud. We're going to hand it to her so she knows we're not rewriting the past. I'll write what I witnessed after you speak, so she gets the full sequence." He took the pen, the aunt leaning forward to see the words as they formed. The father's lines wavered, starting with the date, then the word I. The niece watched him write, breathing small clouds into the cold room. When he handed her the page, she traced the letters, nodded, and slid it into an envelope labeled "For Maya." Then she settled back on the couch, tapping the recorder again until the red light flickered, capturing the soft shuffle of breathing. "I'm the one who broke the silence," she said, meeting both of their eyes in turn. "I'm the one who will keep breaking it, one call at a time, until we stop pretending that justice can happen without openness." She reached for the aunt's hand, held it for a beat, and let go only when the aunt clutched life back into her own grip. The father pulled his phone from his pocket, thumb hesitating over Maya's name. He stared at the screen, then set the phone down and nodded toward the niece. "You won't let me forget," he said quietly. "Good," she replied, and slid the index card labeled "Family Meeting" into the middle of the table. A small victory that felt like the first clean breath in the room. The recorder hummed softly on the coffee table, a small, relentless witness to what the room could no longer hide. The father's hand shook as he held the phone to his ear, his own written words between fingers sticky with tears, the script he had promised to read aloud. He spoke into the silence of the speaker, voice low and raw, the whispered admissions spilling out for Maya to hear, the betrayal spelled out with the steady cadence he once used for bedtime stories. The aunt stood with the box of cookies forgotten behind her, watchful, stunned, then stepping toward the niece with a tremor of gratitude and grief mingled on her face. The niece sat upright, shoulders squared, already plotting the next call, the next meeting, the next truth to be laid bare. She would not let the silence fall again. In that living room, justice had no retreat. The cycle was broken, and honesty moved forward without mercy, without apology, without return.